Good morning, everyone. It's an incredible honor to be here. And before I start, I just want to show some deep gratitude and respect for the team from Transport Canada, specifically John and Mark. We've been having discussions about this initiative for almost 2 years now. And I want to start with one of my favorite quotes, is the fact that something is difficult to do doesn't mean we shouldn't try. And what you're about to do is not easy. It's not complicated. It's quite simple, but it's essentially trying to figure out what are the policies that, if put in place, will drive the right incentives to ensure that there are no constraints to the economic growth of Canada and the individual companies within it. My talk today is going to be covering a specific part of that, which is the power of identifying and removing constraints. And I'm going to share with you something that might not be that intuitive, is that resources don't wake up in the morning and say, I want to be a bottleneck. We allow them to become constraints, either by not investing enough or by wasting the potential that's there, or by having policies that are not aligned with what is needed by the constraint at that stage. So I'm going to show you how you can remove constraints by identifying and resolving policy conflicts. That's going to be the essence of this later session this morning, where all of you will be involved to see if you can make that link, see if you can connect a constraint or main problem that you're experiencing that's limiting your organization's operational or financial performance with a specific policy that, if you could just change it, would change everything. In my presentation, I'm going to be covering just a brief introduction about our company, and it's only relevant to show you the type of projects that we've been involved in and what is possible if you apply hyperfocus. I'll give a short introduction about theory of constraints. Most of you probably understand it, at least intuitively. There are a few elements that might not be that intuitive that I'll share. I'm going to share with you a simple technique that I've developed of how do you find the Holy Grail, which is what is the next one thing for you to focus on, for your organization to focus on. There are so many things that are wrong. There are so many goals that we can have. There are so many constraints. There's so many problems. There's so many solutions out there. How do we find the one next thing to focus on? So that's number 4. I'm going to translate that into how do I take that one thing and figure out, why am I stuck? Why is this still a constraint? Why is this still a problem? What is the policy conflict that we haven't yet resolved that can change everything? And show you a very simple way of trying to see how can you resolve conflicts in a win-win way. I'm going to show you a little bit of complications about how do you decide on one goal, one constraint, because a constraint by definition relates to a goal, right? Unless I'm clear about the goal, we don't know what the constraint is. What is limiting me from achieving that? And there's really just 5 goals that we have when it comes to complex systems. We want to do more. We want to do it faster. We want to do it more reliably, better. We want to do it cheaper, and we want to do it simpler. The simplicity part is a major element, because every time I'm adding a link to my supply chain, every time I'm adding a linkage, I'm making things exponentially more complex. And there's an enormous cost of complexity it just catches up on you. So I'll share a little bit about that, about how do you go back to that inherent simplicity. And then we'll leave it for some Q&A. We founded it back in 2009 with Dr. Eli Goldratt. That's why it's called Goldratt Research Labs. He was the creator of Theory of Constraints. And our research lab is focused on partnering with both private and public sector to answer just 2 questions. Very simple questions, not always easy to answer, which is, how much better can you do? And just a show of hands, do you agree that you can always do better? Yes? So the question is not, can we do better? It's how much better can we do? And there's an immediate conflict when it comes to this, because the one side says, we can do only a little bit better, considering all the improvements that we've already made in the past, considering the fact that we've already plucked all the low-hanging fruit. We should be realistic and set expectations that we can only do a little bit better. So it's common to have improvement targets of 10%. Now, if you think about a country and you want to do really well, imagine you setting yourself a target of over the next few years, improving something by a factor of 10x or 100x. How much you improve every year makes a big difference. If you improve 10% per year, it'll take you 50 years to get to 100x improvement. If you can improve by 100% per year, it'll only take you 8 years. If you can improve by 10x per year, it will only take you 2 years. And there are cases, and I'll show you some examples, where we can improve by 100x almost overnight. If you just think about how long did it used to take somebody to write a book? Anybody's written a book here? I can tell you, I have written a number of books. The fastest I've ever written it was 4 weeks, and literally locking myself in a room because it was going to be embarrassing. I was invited to a conference and I had organized a book signing and I didn't have a book. So, kind of embarrassing. So 4 weeks, if you do nothing else, 20 hours a day, and you just write. But it can also take 4 years, or 8 years, or 12 years. Today with AI, you can write a book in a couple of hours, right? That's not a 10% improvement. It's not a 100% improvement. It's not 10x, it's 100x, it's 1,000x faster. So we are moving into a world where we have these exponential technologies. Can we use them to do a lot better? And to be competitive, you're going to have to do a lot better. So the second question that we answer is, how best to do better? Of all the things that I can change, what are the few high leverage points that if I make the change, it will be the simplest, fastest, lowest cost, lowest risk way of doing it? And I want to share with you just a couple of brief case studies. Some of the customers that we've worked with here before. Microsoft, they approached us and said they'd recently, this was back in 2015, they'd recently purchased Nokia. It turned out that the efficiencies that they were hoping for wasn't going to be there. The only benefit that they could get was to get onto one SAP system. And they thought that that would save them about $100 million or so. And I said, while we're doing that, can we redesign our whole supply chain? We're still experiencing quite significant shortages and surpluses. Now, I want you to think about that. How long do you think it would take you to redesign completely a global supply chain like that? To agree on what are the best rules to do everything from engineer to order, make to order, assemble to order, bundle to order, like Xboxes, they make video games, they bundle it with a game, etc., and make to stock. And implement those new rules once it's been tested into the SAP system. What do you think? How long will that take? Considering this is SAP, which normally adds a few years to everything, right? From start to finish, 3 months. Came up with the hypothesis of the rules, tested it in a digital twin, and implemented those new rules into SAP. Within the first financial year that we worked with them, we got their inventories down by $250 million and sales up by a few $100 million, just by changing a few rules in their system. How they make decisions about what products to produce, where to produce it, how much to produce, when to replenish. So a very simple example, they were already considered to be one of the leaders in the field. They didn't think that there was that much potential to improve. The second year we did it again. Inventory down by another $250 million as we were expanding, sales up by a few $100 million again. A very inspirational example is ChitChats. Who of you know of ChitChats in the room? So ChitChats was started by a good friend of mine, serial entrepreneur, one of the largest owners of domains in the world, Dr. Kevin Ham, Canadian citizen, and he was absolutely passionate about helping young entrepreneurs become competitive, not just locally, but internationally. And he said, one of the major constraints is that the shipping costs are just too high in Canada. It's almost double what it is for entrepreneurs in neighboring countries like North America, like USA. So he set a goal to say, I want to reduce the shipping cost by half. The company was started back in 2001, and they've achieved that goal. They're now shipping millions of packages, allowing small to medium-sized businesses to become competitive, not just locally, but internationally, because they figured out what is really constraining them from dramatically reducing the shipping cost. And many of those things were out of their control, but they found ways to influence it, to control it. Another example is Utah government. We were approached by Utah government, and they said the governor ran on a promise to improve productivity across the board in each of the 24 agencies by 25%. And it had never been done before, to essentially promise that for every dollar you're giving as a taxpayer, you'll get 25 cents more back than ever before. And I asked him what his target was. He said he wanted to do it within 3 to 4 years. He didn't have a way of measuring productivity, which was a problem. We agreed how to measure productivity, very simple. We're going to measure the throughput, the output, multiplied by the quality or the reliability, and we divide it by the operating expenses. So throughput, quality over operating expenses. If the agency is not meeting the demand placed on it, then the goal should be to do more until you meet the demand. And that's the upper limit of throughput. Maybe you're not doing it within the expected time or quality or reliability. That's all the quality components. So once you meet demand, do it better, do it faster. And then the last part is try to do it cheaper, which is the bottom line, as long as it doesn't negatively impact your throughput and quality and reliability. Within 9 months, we achieved 25% improvement in productivity in 24 government agencies. We had a single way of measuring productivity in every process, every critical process in every agency, and rolled it up to get a productivity measurement for the whole government. So the reason why I'm sharing these things is that, yes, these systems are massively complex. Yes, it's difficult to get everybody to sit around a table and agree what changes are. What makes it possible is this idea of focus on the weakest link. If you can find and focus on the weakest link, you can make the whole chain stronger. Improving any other link doesn't help. So that's the essence of it. So brief introduction, I mentioned that imagine you have a company or an organization or system that has improved over time and it's starting to plateau. Another question is, what next? Well, if you leave it alone, there's a pretty good chance that the performance will decay. Where do I set my target? Do I set it at that green level, which is stable, small, incremental improvements? Or am I courageous enough to really go for the growth? Which one do you think, if you had to set a target or goal for the transport system in Canada today, would you set it on a green curve or would you set it on a red curve? Show me, Hans, how many thinks that the green curve is the more realistic way of setting targets? Yeah. How many on the red curve? Okay, and a few of you on the UN, you have no opinion. All right. Which of those two shows what the population growth looks like? Red curve or green curve? It's a red curve, right? It's exponential, right? And we'll talk a little bit about that. You can quickly calculate the doubling time of population by the rule of 70. You're growing by 3.5%, which is the urbanization rate. Typically, the population in the city will be 70 over 3.5, so 20 years doubling time. That's what creates the exponential. So if you are providing a product or service that somehow is consumed by human beings, your target should be exponential growth. And that puts us in a conflict. Because in order to get to the red curve, we feel pressured to make some changes. We need to make some policy changes. At the same time, there's pressure not to change. Both of those options have an upside, right? To achieve the growth, I have to make the change, but to maintain stability and compliance, I shouldn't make any, at least major changes. both of them also have downsides, and now I get stuck. And one of the fundamental principles of theory of constraints as a warning is never allow inertia to cause a constraint. And that is by far the hardest problem to solve in organizations. Why is that? Here's the reason. Doesn't matter what type of change that you're looking at in organizations, and by the way, in our personal lives as well, there's almost a universal law, 70% of them fail. So if you're in an organization, what is the safest bet when you are being asked to make a change? Is to find a reason not to do it now. Do you agree? And that's why we're stuck. Is it just much more risky to be part of a change? But that's why you get stuck. So why is this failure rate so high? It makes no sense. Most of us have been in the same system for a long time. We do experiments. We should have a pretty good idea what works and what doesn't, right? And the more complexity is, the harder it is. Why do we struggle so much? It's because of the way that we approach complex systems. The traditional approach says if you want to analyze and improve and manage a complex system, what should you do? You break the thing up into parts, and you analyze and improve and manage each of the parts. Because there's an inherent assumption that the sum of local optima will give me global optima. Everybody do what's good for them, the system will improve. And of course, not only it doesn't, it often harms the system. And that's why things get worse and not better. I recently wrote a book about the housing crisis. In South Africa, the most houses ever built was in 1999, last year of Nelson Mandela's presidency. We built 235,000 affordable houses that year, first time it ever met the demand. Last year, despite all the advancements in construction technology, everything, we built 34,000 houses. The demand is now 500,000 a year. I thought that was bad. Anybody knows what the spike in building affordable houses was which year in America, in the USA? Anybody take a guess? The most houses ever built, affordable houses ever built in the USA, 1970. 455,000 houses. Last year, 55. Why? Because it used to be simple, easy, and profitable to build affordable houses. And guess what's happened? Now it's extremely complex. It takes a long time because of all the permitting and zoning, and it's not profitable, so they don't build it, right? And yet, when you look at that system, every year, every part of the system is asking for budget to improve. And the system is not only not improving, it's actually getting worse. The more regulations we add, the more we get overwhelmed by complexity, we get less done, everything takes longer, we make more mistakes. So is there another way? Yes. For many years, in fact, many decades, I've been very privileged to have been mentored by some of the pioneers in systems thinking, Dr. Eli Goldratt, Prof. Russ Ackoff, Albert Bartlett, pioneers within systems thinking and systems approach. For many, many years, we've already known that you cannot analyze, improve, and manage a system by analyzing, managing, improving the part. You have to do it holistically, follow a systems approach. There's only one problem. How the heck do you do it? How the heck do you do it? Should I really check every decision that is made everywhere on how this will impact the whole system? And that's a problem that theory of constraints is solving. But before I get to the solution, just to say, what is a system? So for you to think about the transport system, for something to be a system, it needs a clear goal. And in our discussions here, we thought it would make sense to make the goal of the transport system in Canada very simple. Do not become the constraint to the economic growth of the country, of any private companies. Make sure you have enough capacity to ensure that you are not the constraint to the economy. Does it make sense? Right? Simple goal. For a company, it would be to make more money. For purpose organization, it would be an impact goal. I want to feed 1 million people. But that goal that has been set dictates a number of things. It dictates, first of all, the work that has to be done to achieve that goal. What products, what services do I need to provide? It also dictates the resources I need to do the work, and more specifically, how much of every resource I need. It also dictates what rules I should use. A good analogy to think about this, there's 2 types of rules in industries. There's the rules to play the game. It's kind of like chess. What makes chess so complicated? It's not that the rules to play the game is complicated. You can teach a child that. Same in any industry. You walk into a new industry, it's a bit overwhelming until you figure out all the language, and then you figure it out, okay, so this is how the game is played. What's much more complicated is to figure out the rules to win the game. Same as in chess. Why is it so complicated? Because you have so many options. If you think about managing inventory, you could use a min-max rule, a day's coverage rule, an economic order quantity rule, a demand-driven MRP rule, a just-in-time rule. These are all different rules. How the heck do I know which is best for me? Not generally, but for my specific situation. So that's the part of the rules, is what are the rules that we're going to use to design our system in the most optimum way, to plan it, to execute it, and to continuously improve. And then the last part is the metrics. We need a good system has got 3 types of metrics. The lag metric, are we achieving more of the goal? The lead metrics, why are we not achieving it? What's wrong with our throughput, our reliability, our quality, etc. And then the last part is the compliance rules. Are we actually following the rules that we agreed upon? Because if I'm not getting that goal, and I don't know if everybody's complying to the rules, I will never know whether my lack of performance is it because I'm using the wrong rules or because I'm simply not complying to the rules that are there. All of these challenges, as I'll share with you, a quick way of testing it is building digital twins. But going back to the definition of a constraint is simply a resource that I need that I don't have enough of. Make sense to everybody? It's not a policy. It's not a measurement. It's not a behavior. It's a resource that I need to achieve the goal. I need demand. I need capacity and capability. I need supply. I need cash. And by the way, I also need management attention. Any one of those 5 can become a constraint. So how do you achieve continuous improvement? What Goldratt discovered was a kind of a hack for systems approach. He realized that actually you can analyze, improve, and manage the whole system just by analyzing, improving, and managing the constraint of that system. So it's a profound discovery. It's so simple, so intuitive once you get it, to say that if I want to study the strength of the chain, do I need to know the strength of every single link? No, I just need to know what the strength of the weakest link is. Then I can make a reliable commitment regarding how much the strain can do, and I can make decisions based on does it increase or not the strength of that weakest link until the weakest link moves. So it's a dramatic simplification, and it's true whether you have 3 links in your system or whether you have 30,000 links in your system. That is always true. It's very intuitive, but guess what people do in practice? Is they're trying to analyze, improve, and manage every part of the system in isolation. And often what makes it worse is all the incentives are aligned with that. All the policies are aligned with that. And what we'll discover is that sometimes we put policies in place that assume the constraint was in one area. The constraint is no longer there, but the policy, the rule is still in place. And as a result, it's harming the system. It hasn't recognized that the constraint has moved. I want to give you a simple example. If I asked you, how long will it take you to do a one-day task? What will be your answer? The right answer should be it depends. It depends on 2 things. The first one is the variability of the task itself. So when I say 1 day, it means on average it takes us 1 day. But it could take half a day. Maybe it's a little bit simpler than what we expected. Quite easily could take 2 days if it's a bit more complicated. But that's a level of variability I would expect between half a day and 2 days. What else does it depend on? It depends on your busyness. Do you agree? So if you had nothing else on your plate, on average it'll take you a day. But what if you're already 50% utilized? Now it will take you 2 days. 1 day, the task will wait for you to become available because you're busy with something else. And then 1 day to do the work. What if you're 80% busy? Now the same 1 day task will take 5 days. 4 days waiting in queue, in backlog, 1 day doing. What if you're 90% busy? 10 days for the same 1 day task. What if you are 99% busy? It'll take 100 days to do a 1 day task. Has that ever happened to any of you? If we could just get everybody in a room together and get 1 day task done in 1 day, right? But what do we allow to happen? The whole system is constantly waiting for resources. There's two fundamental ways of managing systems. One is I make the work wait for resources because I'm trying to maximize the utilization or busyness of resources. The other option, which is very counterintuitive, feels extremely inefficient, is I never want the work to be waiting for resources. It should just flow. If I walked into an environment and I say, I think there's a way that you can do something 100 times faster, what would be your response? Should it be skeptical? We've been doing this for 30, 40 years. Pretty easy to do it 100 times faster if it turns out that that task on average waits 99 days before it can get the resource that's needed to work on it. So just by making sure that we have enough resources, I can at least 10x it from 100 days to 10 days, and maybe down to 5 days, and maybe even faster under emergencies. And that's what we're talking about there. These are rules to optimize the system that are very simple, but they're very counterintuitive because everybody's trying to maximize the utilization of their resources. It's kind of the analogy I want you to visualize, an incredible orchestra. And these musicians are highly trained with the most expensive pieces of musical equipment. And you make the reward function is to utilize the resource fully. What will that sound like? Everybody trying to play all the time, 100% utilization, versus having a sheet of music that says, it's your turn now, etc. That's what makes these systems so hard to manage. Is we don't want work, whether it's product or service, to be waiting too long for resources. At the moment they are. And that's why we get much less done. Everything takes longer. We make many more mistakes because when you get overwhelmed in that high stress environment where everything's waiting for you, you just make more mistakes. So theory of constraints in a nutshell is all about focusing. But focus doesn't mean just what to do. It means much more importantly what not to do. Because focusing on everything is synonymous with not focusing on anything. And that's a challenge. So what makes it so hard to apply the systems approach, a constraint focus systems approach? So how do I find the one thing to focus on next? I like to think about pairings. We have one goal, one constraint. So the one goal tells me the work I have to do, and it tells me how much of each of those work I have to do, right? So it puts a demand on the system. This is how much I need. I can then look at my resourcing. This is how much I have. And the vertical bars are showing that availability of the resource. And I can see my limit is my constraint C. That is what determines the overall limit. I can't produce more than what C can produce. So I've gone from one goal that determines the need to one constraint that tells me C is the thing I need to improve if I want to do more. But if I want to do it faster, that horizontal line below it represents the total time it takes me to convert inputs into outputs, into products or services. And the little blue bars and the red bar represent the time of doing the work. In between the spaces is the waiting time. So if I'm focused on trying to do things faster, I'm not that interested in C. That's not the leverage point. Even though it makes up the longest working time, it's small in terms of the total time. Does it make sense to everybody? So most constraints that we have today are not doing constraints, they're waiting constraints. It's work waiting for a resource, waiting for a decision to be made. And that's often by far the biggest leverage opportunities. And I'll give you a simple example. In 1926, Henry Ford's supply chain to convert a ton of iron ore into a Model T car driving into a dealership. How long do you think the total time is? I can tell you what it is today. We've worked with Tata Steel that owns that whole supply chain from the iron ore mine to the dealership of the car. Just adding up the inventories that's sitting at the mine, at the steel plant, at the assembly plant, etc., is about 6 to 9 months. In 1926, Henry Ford did that transformation in 81 hours. 81 hours with old technology. Right. Why? How was he able to do that? Because he never wanted the ton of steel to be waiting for a resource. In fact, one of the primary positions in the Ford company at that stage was flow managers. They had just 2 jobs. They followed the flow of work, and when it got stuck, priority number 1 was get it unstuck, make it flow again. And second job was write a procedure to ensure it never gets stuck again. In that time period, it took them, I think, from 1896 to 1914 to build 1 million cars. Within 10 years, they were doing 2 million a year. In that same time period, they had reduced the cost of a car, the price of a car to a consumer by 40%, and they doubled the wages, more than doubled the wages, from $2.40 a day to $6 a day. That's what happens if you can improve flow, is everything gets better. You can do more, you can do it much faster, much better, much cheaper. So that's what step 0 is about: one goal, one constraint. Step 1 is to say, I now have a gap between what I need of this constraint and what I have. So that gap can represent capacity, it can also represent time. It's currently taking me 100 days, I want to get it down to 10 days or to 1 day. There's a gap there. That gap is made up of multiple problems. And I want to look for the one problem to solve. Now, what's good about Pareto is I can apply Pareto on all of this, right? There's 20% of those problems will explain 80% of the gap. But how many of you know that Pareto is fractal? It applies on itself. Ever heard of that before? 20% of 20%, which is 4, will give you 80% of 80%, which is 64% of that gap. And then you can apply it again. 20% of the 4, which is 1, will give you 20% of the 64, which is 51%. That's what we want to focus on, is to find the one problem that if you can solve it, will close half of that gap. Either in terms of throughput or speed or quality or reliability or cost. This is the huge, profound insight of Pareto, is it applies on itself. There's always the vital few and the vital one here that can explain a big chunk of that gap. So we want to find that one problem, and that's what we're going to do in the discussions, is for you to start off here to say, my business, my organization's operational or financial performance is constrained. What is that constraint and what's the problem you need to solve? Are you either wasting what you have? Why is that? What policy is causing you to waste it? Or I'm not wasting it, but I'm not optimally using it. I think that there's a better way of allocating the capacity, but there's some policy that's blocking me from doing it. Or the third thing is we just don't have enough. We don't waste it. We are already allocating it optimally. We really just don't have enough, and there's some policy that blocks me from getting more of that when I really need it. Does it make sense? So that's going to be in the table groups, as you're going to say, for your organization, for your company, where's your constraint at the moment, and what's a problem that you need to solve? And then we're going to see what's the solution. So the next step is one problem, one conflict. So we have a problem. There's a solution to the problem, which is some change in policy, measurement, or behavior. Why isn't it being done? Because there's a conflict. That change conflicts with what we're currently doing. And what makes it tricky is that there's pros and cons of each of these. Right? So critical thinking literally just means don't jump from the problem to the solution. First check, is this an important problem? Is it the right problem that we're solving? Will it actually make a measurable impact in closing that gap? Often we work on a problem and they go, well, how much better will this help us do? Well, 1 to 2%. Well, the noise is 10% up and down, right? So 1 to 2%, we couldn't even measure the impact because it's smaller than the noise, right? So is it contributing 20, 30, 50% to that? Is it the right problem? And then what's the solution? What's the status quo? What's the current policy that we have in place? And often policies are not just written, but they applied. Who of you have heard of spend it or lose it? Anybody? Yes? It's one of those things where when you hear it the first time, you say, I will never do it. Doesn't matter what pressure is put on me, it's just a huge waste. And then you are put in a position of responsibility, and you've been frugal the whole year, and you're left with a budget, and your controller says, you know what, kind of, unless we spend it, we're going to lose it, not just this year, but next year as well. That would be an example of don't waste what we have, right? If I really have saved it, why can't I save it and share it? That would be a real innovation, right? Is allow me to keep 50% and I'll give the 50% back to the treasury. But the status quo is spend it or lose it. Both of them have got pros and cons. Does it make sense? And that's why we get stuck. Critical thinking says, don't just look at the pros of the solution that you want and the cons of the policy and bitch and moan about that. Critical thinking means trying to put yourself in the shoes of the people that put that old policy in place in the first place and try to understand what was the positive of that policy. And is it still a benefit? Is it still something that's desirable? And then why won't they immediately accept your solution? What are the cons? What are the effort that will be involved, the cost, the risks of doing it? That's what we're going to be doing in the work sessions. It's essentially, you're going to be doing this diagram as the step 1 and 2. And then the next thing that you're going to do is to really brainstorm to say, what if we could come up with an innovation? An innovation is different to a solution. A solution solves a problem. An innovation solves the right problem that's related to a constraint that I have. So it's not just improving a part because we could improve it, it's because we must improve it. It doesn't require me to have trade-offs. Trade-offs means the solution is not a viable option because it means I have to give up the pros of no change. And I have to live with the cons of the change. That's not viable. Innovation would be something that I've proposed, that I've added something to the solution to give me the pro of no change and to deal with the cons of the change. So imagine you're overweight. What is the solution? Go on a keto diet. Have you gone on a keto diet yet? No. Why? Well, I'm kind of in a conflict. Well, what's a conflict? On the one side, feel better to go on a keto diet, cut out carbs. The other one is eat what I want. Okay. So what would be a real innovation? Do you think it would be helpful if I keep telling you the pros of the keto diet and the cons if you keep on eating carbs? Do you think that would be helpful? Most problems are not because of ignorance. They're because of inertia. We get stuck. Why do we get stuck? Because we don't have to give up anything. So if you asked, what is the pro of being able to eat what you want? What is that like? A lot of people put in there, it helps me to cope with stress. And I'm in a stressful environment. And eating what I want is a joyful experience that helps me to make life a little bit better. Good. So can we add something to the keto diet? What do you really don't want to give up? I don't want to give up pasta and bread. Okay, so we're going to go for the keto diet, but we're going to add keto-friendly pasta and bread. Would that be a real innovation? Absolutely. Okay, great. What's the second problem? Well, there's a kind of a cons of the keto diet. It's actually hard to buy for it. It's expensive. It's difficult to find it. Okay, can we find a meal service that will deliver keto-friendly food to your house? Now I've got an innovation. I've got the solution. I've added two things to it. One, to deal with the not wanting to lose the benefits of the current policy. And the second one is not dealing with the effort or the cost or the risk of the new one. So that's going to be your criteria that you'll use. For your situation, you're going to define what's your constraint or problem and why is it bad for you and others in the system. You're going to look at what, if you were put in the place of responsibility, what policy will you change and what is that in conflict with? And try to see what the pros and cons of each options are. And then the third step is see if you can come up with an innovation. And the innovation is as simple, what can I add so I don't have to give up this? What can I add so I don't have that I can reduce the effort or the cost or the risk? So the last step, which we won't get chance today, but it's one innovation, one experiment, is one of my biggest discoveries is we don't learn from experience. We learn from experiments. It's worthwhile repeating. We do not learn from experience. We learn from experiments. Think about touching a hot stove plate. You don't have to touch it twice. Why? Because it was an experiment and you got fast feedback. Does it make sense? Imagine it took you a day for that thing to burn you. How long will it take you to learn the lesson? Or it took a week for you to burn. That's the problem we have in complex systems. There's long lags between us making a change and seeing the outcome. By the time we see the outcome, we have no idea if it was this thing that actually caused that, because many things are going on. So an experiment is something that I'm clear about the assumption that I want to check. If I touch this plate, will I burn me? If I make this change in policy, does it prevent one of the parts to behave in a local optimal way? How can I test it in the simplest, fastest way to get fast feedback? And often it's just about asking. We measure you in this way. You do the following. We understand it, spend it or lose it, right? It's really undesirable. Our simulation model at Utah government, which is similar to many other governments, 8% of the total budget is wasted on spend it or lose it. 8%, right? So how can we do a quick test that can do that, right? We're clear on the assumption we want to test. If I make this change in the policy, I will correct the behavior of one of the parts that's behaving in a way that's not good for the system, or one of the parts that don't have enough capacity. And how can I get fast feedback? And once I've done that, I say, problem solved? Yes, I've gotten half of that gap back. What's the next problem? Or maybe what's the next constraint? So that's the focusing cycle of being able to constantly find one thing. It's very difficult to apply in reality because we start off with many goals. What's the one goal that you want to do? Once I have the one goal, what's the one constraint? Not the many constraints, the one. And then once I have the one constraint, what's the one problem? Not the many problems, the one that I need to solve that will have the biggest impact. And if I can't control that, what's problem number 2? We're going to be concentrating on these boxes here. So one problem, one conflict, one innovation. I want to share with you just a few case studies that makes it sense so that when you're completing it, you have good examples that you can imagine. And I think that some examples will also be shared with you that's more relevant to Transport Canada. So the constraint here is a coal mine. It had to produce 12 million tons a year. So BHP coal mine, BHP is here in the group. Coal mine in South Africa, they had to produce 12 million tons a year. After 4 months, only achieved 3 million tons. The constraint moved between the drag lines and the trucks to the plant. So it was constantly moving. Free constraints that are interactive. It's a chaotic situation. So why is that bad? If they cannot catch up, it means that they will end at 9 million, not 12, which means massive penalties to customers for late and non-delivery. Another round of layoffs probably, and not getting the capital from the group for the upgrades that they need. So what's a constraint and a problem? Why is it bad for them and for the system? What's the solution? As we're running behind, we don't have enough capacity. Please give us more capacity. And guess what the answer is? No, we don't have budget, right? And you're not special. Everybody else is asking, so don't ask. Each one of those options have got pros and cons. So the reason for asking for more budget is it means that we have a chance of catching up and reducing the risk of layoffs and penalties. And the con of not asking for more capital is we definitely won't get it. That's the one con, which means we won't catch up, and there's a high risk of more breakdowns and even safety incidents. But why do I also feel pressure not to ask? Because I can stay within budget and have an excuse if I don't meet target. Right? Ever heard that before? Never said, but it's like, didn't get the capital, thank goodness. Right? And of course, there's also a con. What if we asked? It's going to be a major effort to get that approval, because we have to justify why we're special. And what if we get it and we don't deliver? So what was the innovation here? We said we're not going to ask for capital. What we're first going to do is to see, are we wasting what we've got? And I did a little exercise with a group. I said to them, I want you on a flip chart to write down any initiative that takes up a big chunk of your management attention and budget. And we started sticking it up on the wall. And then when we got to about 100, I paused them and I said, okay, now I want you, we've just agreed on a problem, right? We need to be able to produce more tons. Do you agree? If we can't get to 12 million, nothing else matters. So I said, of the 100, for each of them, can you just write at the bottom of that initiative, how many more tons will that initiative give me? Anyone wants to take a guess? Of the 100 things that was demanding their attention budget, how many actually would make a difference on the tons? Any idea? It was 5, right? And the fifth one was a bit shady, but we gave it to them, 5. So guess what we did? We said we're going to stop 95. And immediately we got resistance. Well, there's this one, we have to do it because it's a compliance issue with safety and environment or labor. Great, okay. It turns out that there were another 5 that they had to do for compliance. But it immediately released 90% of the management attention and budget. And then we did the second thing, which is, okay, let's take the first process. You don't have enough capacity. How can you produce 50% more? They had to go from 750,000 tons a month to 1.125, not just to 1 million, because they had to catch up. And the question I asked was very simple. They would say it's impossible, and then I would say it's impossible unless. And that changes the brain, the way that the brain functions. Immediately it will start listing all the unless conditions. And we ended up being able to come up with a reliable plan at the end of that one day of how to not just catch up, but keep up. And they ended up, at the end of the year, producing more than the 12 million tons for the first time ever. They got bonuses. They went from the worst performing to one of the best performing in the group. So it makes sense to everybody, but the check is, if that thing that I've written there as my idea of an innovation, does it allow me to get all the pros without any of the cons? So that's going to be your check. Another quick example, the book publisher one that I mentioned, 40% of all books come back for shredding. It's a $150 million problem every year, and we are the best in the industry. This was from Random House Publishing. Why is this bad? Is the supply chain constraint is actually the retail store shelf space and cash. So 40% of the books come back for shredding. It meant that that bookshop at least had 40% of their shelf space and cash occupied by bricks. So they were trying to make money with half the space and half the cash. No wonder most of them became marginal and closed down. So they wanted to go and ask the retailers to just order smaller quantities more frequently. Don't order 3 months of supply. Our transportation system can supply almost anywhere in the US within 1 or 2 or 3 days at most. Why are we ordering 3 months? But there was a prevailing rule that said everybody benefits if we get them to order 3 months. The retailer gets a discount. The publisher feels great because they get a big chunk of orders for the new book. The author is happy. The printer is happy. Everybody's happy when everybody orders 3 months. But nobody's winning. So each of those have got pros and cons. Of course, if you can get smaller quantities more frequently, you have lower risk of surpluses and shortages, faster inventory turns for the retailer, right? But they were worried about the efficiency side. So our innovation was, we asked the retailers to do this, but we gave them a digital twin to show them what the benefits will be, both operationally and financially, to all the stakeholders making this change. And we got dramatic results. They doubled net profit for them and the retailers within the next 9 months in an environment that they were struggling to protect their profitability. So the last thing that I want to share before we start with the work is there's a complexity even in applying the idea of a weakest link. Imagine a real chain, and I give you a copy of this real chain, and I say, which link are you going to focus on? Which one would you pick? Would it be obvious? No, all the links look the same. They were made in the same place with the same strength, same weight, same length, etc. Right? So that's the problem that we have, is when you have systems that have been balanced over time, the bottleneck is moving all the time, and I don't know where to start. And that's where digital twins come in really handy. Is I can say, depending on your goal, I can find out where the constraint is. So if your goal is to do more, make the chain stronger, I will find the weakest link. And the way of testing it is I will add strength to that weakest link and see if the chain can withstand more strength, more stress. If not, then it wasn't the weakest link. But what if my goal was not to do more, but to do it faster? Then I should look for the longest link, the waiting constraints, right? Not the doing constraints. What if we're already meeting the demand, we're doing it fast enough, but we're just not reliable enough? I should look for the faultiest link. What if I'm already meeting those objectives, but we're just too costly? I should look for the heaviest link or the costliest link. And lastly, constantly look for unnecessary links and unnecessary linkages. Does that make sense to everybody? But the idea is still, I'm looking for the one constraint, the one problem to solve next. So we'll leave it up there, but we'll start off. I think it's a break now, and I'll hand over to you.